Good to be with y'all on a beautiful Sunday. Of course, I had to wear black in commiseration with the local sports team, but not really. I happened to be wearing that, and I thought, All right. Welcome back to our study of gospel personages, as it is entitled. Last week, if you remember, we did our study over Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, and this morning we're kind of looking at Luke's other perspective in that same chapter there, just the minorly known character of Mary, mother of Jesus. That'll be our subject this morning, and we're going to be specifically in Luke chapter 1. And if you want to be looking down to verse 26 is where we'll be starting our study this morning. But again, if you remember, we went through the study of Elizabeth and Zechariah being visited by the angel, and then, of course, her being later in years and, for all intents and purposes, barren at that point. And, of course, Zechariah had an experience with being told they would have a child and saying, how is that possible? I'm old, my wife's old, how is that going to be? And the angel says, nope, you don't get to talk anymore. But as we studied Elizabeth, we saw that despite being in the same situation as Zechariah, besides the fact of not being visited by the angel, this all happens to her, and she's going, a bit strange, but yeah, okay, sure. The angel said so, cool. And so we see that what was accredited to her is just the willingness, despite the physical limitations that the world placed upon her of being a mother, she still was like, if God's will be done, then it will be so. And so that was our takeaway from Elizabeth. And in Mary, it very much follows a very similar kind of pattern. But with Mary, we wrap up the experiences of Zechariah and Elizabeth all kind of into one person. It's interesting that we're taking, this morning we're going to be reading from Luke's account, which is the gospel that kind of takes this whole situation and really places it forward from Mary's perspective. If you remember in Matthew, it mostly focuses on Joseph being visited by the angel and how Joseph reacted to the visit, how Joseph was planning on dealing with this whole thing until the angel came and talked to him. Whereas from Luke, we see that mirrored, same kind of time frame, same events and everything, but we're seeing it from Mary's perspective. So, if we're open to Luke, let's real quick read verses 26, and let's do the whole thing at once. If someone wants to read verses 26 through 29.
Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the descendants of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And coming in, he said to her, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." He said through
29.
So, but she was very, very perplexed at this statement and kept pondering what kind of salutation this was.
All right, thank you. So, starting out, Luke, in all his writing, his gospel is very meticulous. It's very informational. It's very, in the profession that Luke followed, would have lent to him being very, almost clinical. And so here we see that Luke is very much setting up the exact details of what kind of situation Mary is in. He says, now this is the 6th month. The angel Gabriel, sent by God, went to a city in the region of Galilee called Nazareth to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. Right there, we know exactly what part of life she's in, what exactly she is like, upcoming events are coming to her, and where and when. And so this is all very much set up very purposefully, because at this point we know that Mary and Joseph are betrothed, but they're not married. Oftentimes, the difference is that when two people became betrothed, the future husband would pay the bride price to the bride's family, and then she was considered his wife. But then the marriage ceremony would oftentimes happen a year later. So there was kind of this in-between period where they were betrothed, but not fully married yet. So the important part of why Luke is setting this up is because what Mary's about to be told has some serious implications if one or both involved parties do not follow the process how it's supposed to be. Because if someone wants to continue on, verses 30 through 34.
But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin?"
All right. So here we see that Gabriel brings very good news. In fact, like unprecedented news to the point of like there's been good news, and then there's this. Like being told you are going to be the mother of the literal coming Messiah that you've been hearing prophecies and foretellings about for hundreds of years before all this. And Mary asks a very pertinent question. And this question, oftentimes we just take at face value, but we don't think about the cultural implications of this question. Because what does she ask? How can this be? I am a virgin. And of course, there's previous encounters with God where God has told them something will happen, and they ask, how can this be? How can this happen because of this and this and this and this? If you go back to our study of Elizabeth's circumstances were difficult. Mary's circumstances are, by all physical implications, impossible. Yeah, I saw a hand.
I guess my thing is when she said she was perplexed at the statement he made, found favor. He's an angel. And I don't know that angels appeared to a lot of people then, but they did appear, but she didn't seem to be terrified. I'm not sure that she knew he was an angel. Maybe she did. It's just, to me, it's just wondering that, this is an angel standing before you. Would I not fall down and be scared to death and that because of that? But
what statement oftentimes do angels lead with? Do not be afraid. Because oftentimes we like to think of the little cherubims like Open Hearts Chapel kind of a thing. Little kids holding little halos. The biblical description of angels is wildly different. Apparently they did not resemble human beings whatsoever. So that was often why they started with a "do not be afraid." But yeah, here we see that Mary, exactly as you said, is not terrified. She's perplexed. Almost in the same kind of reaction mindset as Elizabeth. The question wasn't necessarily, or wasn't even like a fearful one, wasn't one of like, be gone, I'm terrified. It was more of a, why me? Like, why have I been chosen for this? And Gabriel continues on, kind of answers the question beforehand, but even so, even after an angel tells her, you who are favored among women, you who will carry the literal Messiah, she's still like, why me? Like, I'm not a person of any kind of repute or like high standing. But as we'll talk about a little bit later, that's almost exactly why she's one of the ones chosen. But yes, right, so we're seeing the parallels here of Elizabeth and Mary, as one is difficult circumstances, and one, again, by all intents and purposes, like, it is impossible for Mary to be pregnant if she is truly a virgin. And therein lies the crux of the question, because we know that Jewish law is very clear on what happens if a woman is to be found pregnant, either not by her husband or not from a man that she's married to. Specifically, if you look in Deuteronomy 22:13, just so we hear it from like the words of Moses himself. Yes. If a man takes a wife and after sleeping with her dislikes her and slanders her and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman, but when I approached her, I did not find proof of her virginity, then the woman's father and mother must bring forth the woman and give proof that she was a virgin, or else she must be taken to the door of her father's house, and the men of the village will stone her to death. And later on, it talks about if a man is found to have slept with a woman who he is not married to, then he is also to be stoned. So this is not just, Mary might have a bad name around town. She might not, be able to find a new husband. No. If Joseph doesn't follow through with this, if things don't go exactly if they don't follow the Lord's word to the T, someone's most likely going to end up being killed. Yeah.
I believe it's Paul in the New Testament refers to a change in the law. So I'm not sure how that relates to the law of Moses and there being a change in the law.
Right. The change in the law that Paul refers to is the new law that Jesus establishes. So yeah, after Jesus' teachings after his crucifixion, we start to see that flip from the old law to the law that Jesus establishes. However, at this point, Jesus hasn't been born yet. So at that point, Moses' law is very much upheld as the law. That is the rules at this point in time that they follow. Yeah, Jesus, and part of the point of why Jesus was sent to earth was not only to die for our sins, but also to establish that new, better law, as we're learning with the sermon in Hebrews, how Jesus is the better law. Jesus is the better sacrifice than the sacrifices they made with the old law. But at this point, yeah, Moses, the commands of Moses are very much upheld as this is cut and dry, this is the law that we follow. So, if Joseph had decided, I'm not down with this plan, we know that Joseph, even in Matthew's account, was thinking about divorcing her quietly. And while that's all well and good, that's very, long thinking of him. Eventually, 9 months later, Mary is going to have a child. And they're going to be asking Joseph, did you sleep with Mary? And if he says no, they stone her. So, again, it was good that Joseph maybe was trying to think in a way that would not be as cruel, but at the same time, everything had to happen the way that it did. Or else we have a wildly different story, y'all. And so, we talk about all this, all the horrible thoughts of stoning and, infidelity and things, to talk about how amazing it is that Mary still followed through with this. In fact, let's finish our section of reading here. If someone wants to read, finish 35 through 38.
Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" The angel answered and said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you, and for that reason the Holy Child shall be called the Son of God. And behold, even your relative Elizabeth has also conceived a son in her old age, and she who was called barren is now in her 6th month. For nothing will be impossible with God." And Mary said, "Behold, the bondslave of the Lord, may it be done to me according to your word." And the angel departed from her.
Okay, so the distance between Mary's question, how can this be since I am a virgin, to behold the maidservant of the Lord, let it be according to your word, is a big one. And yet, the angel tells her, because with God, nothing will be impossible. He even comforts her. He gives her a real world example of a parallel with her that is happening that we've already studied. He says, Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age, for she is now in her 6th month, even though she was called barren. He's giving her not only an example of, look, this is something that God is making happen right now, that Mary would have been aware of. It would have been, again, distant relatives, we don't know exactly how, like we talked about last week, but this would have been well known that this shouldn't be happening. Elizabeth shouldn't be pregnant. Like, all the people of the village have designated, nope, can't have kids. Too old, can't have kids. Happens anyway. And then Gabriel follows that up with, if that can happen, nothing with God will be impossible. Gabriel doesn't necessarily give Mary, oh, see, no, because actually what's going to happen is you're going to sleep with Joseph, but then the baby will actually be like the Lord's. No. Gabriel says, the impossible will happen. And if you ask someone, how can this impossible thing happen? And they said, well, it's not impossible because we've said it will be. The Lord has said it will be. That's not necessarily, and get what I'm saying here, that's not necessarily a satisfying answer. That's not one that necessarily answers any kind of concerns you might have of any kind of physical happenings, any kind of, like, again, that answer doesn't necessarily explain anything. But Mary here, instead of asking more questions, well, what if they question if me and Joseph slept together? What if they question who's the father of the child? She doesn't say any more of that. She hears, through God, nothing is impossible. And she says, behold, I am your bondservant. Let it be as you said. That is faith incarnate right there, y'all.
I think Mary's acceptance of this has to indicate that she was familiar with the prophecies and what was going to happen. They were looking forward to this as young Jewish women at that time.
Yeah.
I think it has to indicate she had some knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Mary would be well aware of the laws, of the prophecies. It seems that, yeah, just Mary is a very well-studied person. And to be chosen like this, to be the mother of the Messiah, I'm guessing she was probably a pretty devout, faithful woman. Yeah.
It also seemed like, and kind of following up on what was said earlier, maybe this isn't her first visit by an angel either, because she doesn't run screaming for the hills.
That's fair.
You know, nothing said obviously about that, but it just seems like she's very calm about it and okay.
Yeah. We don't know, there's nothing in the text, but she could have been visited of like, hey, another angel might come to visit you with news. We might have gone through all that, but again, we don't know that for certain. But yeah, it seems that she is just very familiar with the divine. That she has spent a lot of time in that, yeah.
I was wondering what we know of the angel Gabriel. There's not a lot of background information on
Right.
angels in the Bible.
In fact, yeah, oftentimes angels aren't named. The only time that angels are named in their visits down to earth is whenever it's an archangel. And that word archangel is only used, I believe, about twice in the Bible, is the archangel Michael and the archangel Gabriel. And as far as we can tell, we really don't have much background on like who exactly these angels are, what role they play in heaven. We just know that oftentimes they are the messengers that God sends for big news. We know that obviously Gabriel, we're reading the biggest example of Gabriel coming down to earth and giving news to someone. And then I don't remember exactly what Michael, what the example for him is, but the point is that these angels, when they're named, that means something big is fixing to happen. Yeah.
I think you made a couple of really good points there. You know, there's not an awful lot of information about angels, but we know that the term angel means messenger, right? So we also have other accounts where those angels, those messengers, took the form of a normal human. For example, the angels that visited Lot before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, they just looked like, you know, a couple of guys, not only to Lot and his family, but also to the entire city there. We remember that story. So they're not always terrifying. They are simply messengers more often than not. But I think there's a reason we don't have an awful lot of information. It's because they did their job. They had a task to do. They did their task, and that's the end of it. We have a lot more information about Jesus. We have a lot more information about God, and that's probably where our emphasis usually needs to be focused.
Yep. So yeah, but good question. Yeah, oftentimes it's interesting to think about angels and like how that whole hierarchy works. But yeah, as John just said, oftentimes angels very much had a very pointed purpose to play, and the reason that we don't have much description is because they came down, they did their job, boom, bang, bop.
It is very interesting. It's kind of fascinating when you look at it that way.
Yeah.
Also, to build on that a little bit, the Bible tells us a lot about a lot of things, but it doesn't have filler. The Bible doesn't have filler. It doesn't have a bunch of stuff we don't really need to know about. You know, so I kind of see that as like, yeah, angels exist. Angels have a job. We have seen, not we, but like, certain humans have seen angels before. But knowing things about the angels at this point in our existence is not necessary, and I've actually seen a lot of times people get so obsessed with it that they tend to worship the angels rather than worshiping God. And so I think that the Bible's silence on angels kind of helps drive that point forward, that we don't need.
Yeah. It knows where the emphasis should be, and it's okay to be interested in angels. It's interesting to, exactly. It's a very cool topic, but yeah, the Bible knows where the emphasis should be. It could easily probably go into the backstories of the angels and how they became who they are, but it knows that the importance of angels is not them and them coming down to earth, it's what happens or what follows afterwards. Exactly. And thus the name.
And to the point that you kind of made earlier too, oftentimes one of the first things an angel says is, get up, because the person falls down to worship them. And the angel says, don't worship me. Right? So I always find that interesting too. And sorry, but building on something Jesse said earlier, you know, it's very clear that Mary was devout, that, you know, her family was devout. Same for Joseph, you know, because they were following all of the proper procedures, you know, according to the law of how to become married and all those things. And I find that pretty significant as well, to know that she was a devout person. She was receptive to the word of God when the angel told her these things are going to happen. When she perceived that he is giving her a message from God, she was receptive to it. She had to know whether she wanted to be, you know, the mother of the Messiah or not. She had to know that this was going to be difficult. It may not have actually been what she particularly wanted to do, but it was God's will, and she gave into that. And that's kind of the same for us, right?
Yep.
It's not always easy to choose a Christian life. It's not easy to give up things that we need to give up in order to be pleasing to God. But once we understand that that's God's will, you know, we need need to be obedient like Mary was obedient.
And
Yeah.
just one more thing.
Yeah,
One
no.
more
Discussion is the point of the class, yes.
that Mary must have been very devout and studied, as Jesse said, knowing about these things, but she was not sinless. We all fall short of the glory of God, all, including Mary. I know that there are a lot of doctrines around that kind of hold Mary up as a sinless person, but there's only one, and it's her. It's Jesus.
Right.
So that was just another.
Yeah, and the book goes into that that Mary ultimately, is the mother of Jesus Christ. Yeah.
There's a huge difference between striving for excellence and perfection, and Jesus was perfect.
Yes. We strive to be excellent because we can't be perfect. And just real quick, one thing that can kind of tie into all the discussion we've had here. We're seeing here that the importance of Mary and Joseph's faith wasn't the importance placed upon them wasn't their status. Joseph was a carpenter, a very important part of the village, a very needed profession, but not necessarily a high-paying one. And thus, marrying Joseph, they would not have been high-standing members of the Jewish society in Nazareth. But that wasn't what the Lord was going for, was it? The Lord wasn't showing that he was placing importance on wealthy individuals. He wasn't placing importance on your sway within the community. What God held most high, what God cared about the absolute most, was faith. Was knowing that the two individuals that he picked, not only, again, Luke specifies that were of the house of David, which is exactly what was prophesied the coming Messiah would be from the house of, but two well-known faithful individuals that obeyed his commands, followed out exactly the way that had been set up for them to do. And yes, not perfect individuals, but individuals that he knew followed the word of the Lord. And so here we're seeing the importance, and in the entire life of Jesus, we saw the importance was never about becoming famous in the sense of being a celebrity, of being someone who had lots of money, who had lots of people that cared about being known alongside them as a famous individual. It was all about the message. It was all about obeying that which was set out before them. And here Mary is that ultimate example. Just in the same way as Elizabeth was a great example for her future son, John the Baptist, in the way of faith, in the way of knowing that despite whatever people might say, people wanted to hold John the Baptist up as a great prophet, as the prophet, as he said, no, there's someone coming who's even greater than I. In the same way that parents are being example for their kids, Mary is being the ultimate example of, I'm following exactly what the Lord says. I'm doing it exactly how they have said, because ultimately I don't have any control of this. But I have faith that God will make sure everything happens exactly how it is. And Jesus, in the exact same way, obviously being the extension of God, has a bit more of a connection in that sense, but still, as we see him in the Garden of Gethsemane, leading up to the crucifixion, he's still human, despite being the human extension of God. In the garden, he says, let this cup pass from me, but I know that if it's your will be done, I will do exactly as you say. The whole point is that despite him being human, despite him not being purely divine representation of God, he still went through all that suffering. He could have made a human choice and chosen not to go through all that suffering, but he did anyway, because he had an example from his mother. I know these things are physically impossible. I know that if something even slightly small goes wrong, that I will probably be facing death. But I'm going to do it exactly as you've said because I know that it's going to work out. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off earlier if you had.
Oh, me? I was just gonna throw in there, because I think you said, you weren't sure, Michael did. My dad was named after the Archangel Michael. He's in Revelation, he throws Satan out of heaven.
Right.
He's the one in Jude that we talked about the other day with the weird reference to
I
Moses.
knew it was something recent. Yes, okay, good. Yes, okay, so Michael, yes, the other archangel that's named, yeah, comes up in, Revelation, whenever, he throws Satan out of heaven, and then, when, in our study, when, he talks about Michael being a part of that. So, yes, thank you. I was like, it's like tickling in the back of my mind. I can't, it's right there, but I'm not remembering it, so thank y'all so much. So, and then one more example that actually I want to go, in this example right here, we kind of talked about, the importance I want us to take from this is that the importance is placed upon piety, is placed upon following the words Lord. The words Lord is following the Lord's word. Words can be hard sometimes. And that carries over to today. The Lord really doesn't care how much money we have, how big our house is. He cares about that we followed his word, that we took care of the needy, that we observed his commandments, that we observe the Sabbath, that we come together, that we worship him, that we learn more about his word, and that we take that word and we go out and we teach others about it. It doesn't matter if we're going out to some third world country and telling people who have never heard the word before, or if we walk down the street a block away and talk to our neighbor who has questions about the Bible. The importance is that we took that time and obeyed his commands, go out and make disciples of all nations. And so from Mary to Jesus, straight from his mouth to the Bible, let's place importance on following the word of the Lord. And then I do real quick want to go beyond our book real quick. One more example of Mary's commitment to the Lord's will is I want us to turn, let's go to Matthew. Let's go to chapter 27. In every single gospel account, we know that when Jesus was put up on the cross and was actually lifted up onto the cross, and that was taking place, that there is people at the cross, the Romans that are in charge of making sure that the prisoners are put upon the cross and placed up. But at this point, we know that most of the apostles have scattered to the winds. That after Jesus' torture and crucifixion, most of his followers are gone. They flee out of fear. But there are a few individuals, and specifically Luke just says daughters of Israel, that they're following along behind Jesus and weeping, and he turns to tell them, do not weep now, for if you weep while the good times are here, then it'll be even worse whenever there's bad times. But Matthew, Mark, and John all take into account that there are multiple women at the cross and John. And in Matthew's account, he talks about after all this torturing, after all this, oops, that is the wrong button that I hit. Matthew 27, there we go. And so at the cross, we see, where are we at? There we go. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land, and at about 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Immediately, someone ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine and gave it to Jesus. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And sorry, I started in the wrong place. Skip a little bit down there. Verse 55. After he has died, after they've taken him down, after he's been pierced, many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, mother of Jesus, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. In John, we also know that John was at the cross as well. That's the famous line. Jesus sees Mary and John there, and he says to John, "Behold thy mother," and says to Mary, "Mary, behold thy son." And here, Matthew even lets us know that these women weren't just there at the end. They didn't wait until all the torturing was over and then come to see Jesus. It says that they followed him all the way from Galilee to take care of his needs. Mary was there at the beginning, during, and after of Jesus' crucifixion. Imagine not just, from one perspective, watching the Messiah go through exactly what he said is going to happen is one side of things. Mary is watching the physical child that she carried go through these things. And despite all that, she never once tries to stop it. She never once tries to talk Jesus out of it, despite being with him pretty much this whole trip through. She knows this is something that has to happen. And yet a parent watches their child be beaten, be cut open, and be tortured beyond anything that someone at that time could go through. This is about the worst form of torture available to earthly people in this period of time. And yet there at the end, she's watching her child suffocate and cry out to the Lord. And even in those moments, doesn't doubt. That is massive. That goes beyond, at some point, you would think motherly instincts would try and take over and just wash out any kind of, faith that Mary might have that this is the right thing to do. And yet, she still lets it happen. Talk about ultimate faith. People who traveled with Jesus for his entire life, people who watched him commit miracles, heal the sick, walk on water, couldn't stand to be there anymore. Couldn't watch it happen. Couldn't, out of fear for maybe they would have the same thing done to them. All but one of the apostles gone. Just trying to get away. And here's Mary. And some others as well, watching this happen because they know that this is how it's supposed to be. Yeah.
And they were the first to see risen.
When others asked, "How can this be?" even though they heard Jesus talk about, "I will rise on the third day," still some asked, "How can this be?" And yet we know that the Marys went running to the tomb. Some of the other apostles started walking that direction. The Marys knew. They just wanted to see it quicker. So yes, Mary, the mother of Jesus, plays her part perfectly because she brings into the world the Messiah, the Christ. But folks, you will not find a better example of faith. From a human being that has no connection spiritually, being a piece of God, you will not find a better example of faith. Any other thoughts before we wrap up? Yeah.
It's pretty amazing when you think that she had faith in the original message, and through her faith in God and all the teachings of her whole life, she understood from the Messiah was going to have to go through. And like you said, she understood his birth, his life, and his death before she was even pregnant.
She had her whole lifetime and her child's whole lifetime to know what was coming. Not only in the prophecies, but to hear it straight out of the horse's mouth, right out of Jesus' mouth. He tells her, this is what's going to happen. Could you imagine if your child came up to you and said, yeah, no, so around my 30s, we're going to like go through some serious torture stuff? Would you just be able to sit there and go, all right, if you say that's how it's supposed to go, that's how it's supposed to go? It's insane. Even in our modern times where we can look things up, where we can have all this communication. And yeah, it would take a lot, y'all. And yet Mary does it. Because it is the Lord's will. Anything else? Hot damn, good. There's the timer. Thank you for a wonderful class.